Breaking news, a World War II veteran has revealed top secrets from the war, stories that were never meant to be told. What he says next changes everything.
About 100 men, they surrendered. They were the most heartless human being that I ever saw. That was Hitler's elite troops, the SS. He says, we're not taking prisoners. So they shot him. There was very few survivors.
Breaking. New mission logs reveal how American pilots launched unauthorized rescue flights to save trapped Allied troops during World War II, defying direct orders and flying into extreme weather conditions that grounded most of the Air Force. What followed was a series of decisions that placed human lives above protocol and changed the fate of men stranded behind enemy lines. December 23, 1944, Western Europe. The Battle of the Bulge is at its peak. According to newly reviewed US Army Air Force's mission records, more than 200 American infantrymen from elements of the 106th Infantry Division and attached units were trapped in forested terrain east of the Meuse River after German forces sealed off retreat routes. Cut off during the opening days of the German winter offensive, these troops had been without reliable resupply for nearly 4 days. Ammunition was critically low. Medical evacuations were impossible. Radio contact was fading. Weather reports from that morning describe heavy cloud cover below 1,000 feet, freezing fog, and icing conditions severe enough to ground most Allied aircraft. Official flight orders issued at 0700 hours instructed air units to remain on standby. The risk was considered unacceptable. But inside several forward airfields in northeastern France, a different discussion was taking place. Mission logs from the 9th Air Force, cross-referenced with pilot after-action statements, confirmed that a small group of transport and fighter pilots became aware of the trapped ground units through fragmented radio transmissions and delayed intelligence updates. The coordinates were imprecise. Enemy anti-aircraft positions were active. Weather forecasts showed no improvement. Despite this, at least 6 aircraft crews, some flying C-47 transport planes, others flying fighter escorts, made the decision to prepare for flight without formal clearance. In handwritten notes later added to mission reports, one pilot wrote simply, "Ground units, won't last another night." At approximately 0835 hours, the first aircraft lifted off through dense fog, climbing blind until breaking through cloud layers. Navigation relied on dead reckoning and partial radio signals. German-controlled territory lay ahead. On the ground, trapped American soldiers reported hearing aircraft engines overhead hours later, an unexpected sound after days of isolation. Few believed the planes were Allied. Fewer still believed they were there for them. German forces in the area, according to intelligence summaries recovered after the war, were actively repositioning artillery and patrols, assuming the encircled Americans would soon surrender or be overrun. They did not expect air activity in such conditions. What happened next was not part of any official rescue plan. It was a calculated risk taken by individual pilots who believed delay meant death. As the aircraft pressed deeper into contested airspace, visibility dropped, flak bursts appeared, through cloud breaks, and fuel margins narrowed. Any mistake would be fatal, not only for the crews, but for the men on the ground waiting for help. This unauthorized mission marked the beginning of one of the most extraordinary air rescue efforts of the war, an operation never intended to happen, and one that nearly ended in disaster. Stay with us as we uncover how these pilots located the trapped troops, what they dropped from the sky, and why their actions were quietly buried in reports for decades. Subscribe for more real World War II stories revealed through newly examined records and first-hand accounts. By mid-morning on December 23, 1944, the situation facing the trapped American troops had become dire. Field reports reconstructed after the war revealed that the encircled units, primarily elements of the 422nd and 423rd Infantry Regiments of the 106th Infantry Division, along with scattered support personnel, were operating in isolated pockets across snow-covered forest terrain. Their original withdrawal routes had been cut off within the first 48 hours of the German offensive, leaving them surrounded by enemy infantry, artillery, and armoured patrols. The men had been fighting almost continuously since December 16th. ammunition shortages were severe. Several platoons reported fewer than 10 rounds per rifle by the morning of the 23rd. Heavy weapons had either been destroyed to prevent capture or abandoned during forced night movements. Medical conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Frostbite cases increased each night as temperatures dropped well below freezing, and wounded soldiers were being treated without proper shelter, heat, or pain relief. Radio operators struggled to maintain contact. Batteries failed in the cold. Antennas were damaged by shell fire or hurried relocations. Messages sent to higher command were fragmented, delayed, or never received at all. According to surviving signal logs, the last clear transmission received from one pocket ended with the words, "Supplies exhausted, enemy closing in." German pressure was constant but calculated. Rather than launching immediate full-scale assaults, German infantry units tightened their perimeter, probing American positions and cutting off movement. Patrols followed footprints in the snow. Mortar fire was adjusted based on sound and observation. The objective was clear: wear the Americans down, force surrender, and conserve German strength for continued operations elsewhere. Captured German documents later revealed confidence that the encircled units would not survive much longer. Weather conditions were believed to rule out any meaningful Allied air support. Ground relief was considered unlikely due to the speed of the German advance and the confusion along the Allied front. Inside the American pockets, leadership fell to junior officers and non-commissioned officers. With higher command unreachable, decisions were made locally. Defensive positions were consolidated. Perimeters were tightened. Soldiers were instructed to fire only when necessary. Food was rationed to a fraction of normal intake, often a single frozen ration shared between multiple men. Morale fluctuated, but did not collapse. Diaries and post-war interviews describe exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty, but also resolve. Many soldiers believed they had been forgotten. Others assumed surrender was inevitable, yet few accounts suggest panic. Instead, there was a growing awareness that survival depended on holding out just a little longer. It was under these conditions that the sound of aircraft engines, faint, distant, and unexpected, was first reported. Some soldiers assumed it was German reconnaissance. Others dismissed it as imagination brought on by fatigue. No one had been informed of any rescue effort. No official plan existed. Unbeknownst to the men on the ground, their fragmented radio transmissions and delayed intelligence reports had reached a small group of American pilots willing to act without authorization. While German commanders believed air support was impossible, a decision had already been made that would challenge that assumption. As the trapped troops waited, uncertain of what the next hours would bring, aircraft were already moving toward them through cloud, ice, and enemy-controlled airspace, on a mission that was never meant to exist. Shortly after AU and 8:30 hours on December 23, 1944, several American aircraft lifted off from forward airfields in northeastern France under conditions officially classified as non-flyable. Weather summaries from that morning recorded freezing fog, heavy icing at low altitude, and cloud layers so dense that visual navigation was nearly impossible. Under standard procedure, no flights should have been airborne, yet they were. Mission logs reviewed decades later confirmed that at least 6 American pilots, flying a mix of C-47 transport aircraft and fighter escorts, took off without formal clearance. There were no written orders authorizing the mission, no guaranteed coordinates for the trapped troops, no assurance of safe return. What they had instead were fragmented radio intercepts, outdated maps, and the understanding that time was running out for the men on the ground. Navigation was improvised from the start. Pilots climbed through solid cloud, relying on instruments and dead, reckoning while fighting ice buildup on wings and control surfaces. Several aircraft were forced to fly below cloud cover, placing them dangerously close to German-held territory and within range of anti-aircraft fire. Fuel margins narrowed with every mile. German flak positions, assumed to be inactive due to weather, opened fire as aircraft broke through gaps in the cloud cover. Black bursts appeared suddenly, forcing pilots to maneuver aircraft already struggling under icing conditions. According to after-action notes, One transport plane sustained damage to its fuselage but continued toward the target area. Locating the trapped troops proved even more difficult. The ground units had no prepared drop zones. Panels and signal flares were scarce. Snow covered nearly everything, erasing landmarks. Pilots circled repeatedly, scanning forest clearings and frozen fields while German patrols moved below. Then came confirmation. In a small clearing surrounded by trees, faint signal. Panels appeared, laid out by American soldiers who had heard aircraft overhead and acted on instinct. Fighters descended first, strafing nearby German positions to create a brief window. Moments later, transport aircraft dropped supply bundles from dangerously low altitude. Crates slammed into frozen ground. Parachutes tore. Some supplies were damaged on impact, but enough landed intact to make a difference. On the ground, soldiers ran into the open under the sound of gunfire and aircraft engines. Reports describe men collapsing from exhaustion while dragging crates into cover. Ammunition, medical supplies, and rations, items they believed were gone forever, were suddenly in their hands. The pilots did not linger. With fuel critically low and flak increasing, aircraft turned back individually, often alone, retracing routes through cloud and ice. One fighter escort was forced to divert due to damage. Another barely cleared the cloud layer on climbouts. German situation reports from the same day indicate confusion. Enemy commanders had not anticipated air activity and initially believed the flights were reconnaissance. By the time artillery was repositioned, the aircraft were already withdrawing. The unauthorized mission had succeeded, but at extreme risk. For the trapped troops, it was the first tangible proof they had not been abandoned. For the pilots, it was a gamble that nearly ended in disaster. And for Allied command, it presented a difficult question. What happens when lives are saved by disobeying orders? The answer would come later. For now, the men on the ground had something they hadn't had in days: time. By the afternoon of December 23, 1944, the effects of the unauthorized air mission were already visible on both sides of the battlefield. Newly examined ground reports confirmed that the supplies dropped earlier that day fundamentally altered the immediate survival prospects of the trapped American troops. Ammunition shortages were temporarily relieved. Wounded soldiers received treatment that had been impossible hours earlier. Most importantly, morale, on the brink of collapse, was restored. Small unit commanders reorganized their defenses almost immediately. With fresh ammunition, firing discipline was relaxed just enough to repel renewed German probes. Medical personnel prioritized the most critical cases, using plasma and bandages that had arrived only hours before. Soldiers who had been too weak to stand the previous night were back in position by dusk. German forces, however, quickly adjusted. Intelligence summaries recovered after the war show that German commanders initially believed the supply drop to be a one-time anomaly. That assumption changed as reports filtered in of American resistance stiffening rather than weakening. Patrols encountered heavier fire. Attempts to force surrender through pressure stalled. In response, German artillery resumed concentrated shelling, targeting suspected supply collection points and aid stations. Several drop zones were shelled within hours. Despite this, the Americans retained enough of the delivered supplies to remain combat effective. What the Germans had hoped would be a matter of days was now stretching longer. In the air, the consequences were just as severe. Pilots returning from the mission faced immediate scrutiny. Weather damage was documented. Icing-related control issues, structural stress, and flak damage were evident on multiple aircraft. Maintenance crews recorded concerns that several planes should not have been airborne at all under such conditions. Yet there were no immediate disciplinary actions. According to internal correspondence reviewed decades later, higher command was faced with conflicting realities. Officially, the mission violated standing orders. Unofficially, it had saved lives and stabilized a collapsing situation. Ground commanders began quietly requesting additional air support, citing the effectiveness of the drop. Pilots involved in the mission were instructed to remain silent. No commendations were issued. Mission reports were filed under vague language, omitting the lack of authorization and downplaying the risks involved. The operation was not publicized, nor was it immediately repeated. On the ground, trapped units held their positions through the night of December 23rd and into the 24th. German pressure continued, but without decisive breakthroughs. The Americans were no longer simply enduring, they were resisting. Historians reviewing these events now identify this moment as a critical inflection point. The unauthorized mission did not end the encirclement. It did not guarantee rescue, but it extended survival long enough for larger Allied movements to begin taking effect elsewhere along the front. The pilots had not changed the war with bombs or bullets. They had done it with cargo and courage. What followed next would determine whether this act of defiance remained an isolated incident or became part of a larger shift in the battle's outcome. By December 24, 1944, the situation surrounding the trapped American troops had changed in ways German planners had not anticipated. The encirclement still existed, but its grip had weakened. The men on the ground were no longer operating on borrowed hours. Thanks to the unauthorized air mission, they now had the means to hold out, and that changed everything. German intelligence summaries from late December reveal growing concern. Reports noted that American resistance in the encircled sectors was not collapsing as expected. Patrols encountered organized defenses. Fire discipline had improved. Attempts to force surrender through intimidation failed repeatedly. What should have been a quiet elimination of isolated units had turned into a costly distraction. At the same time, Allied ground movements elsewhere along the front began to exert pressure. German units that might have been used to crush the trapped Americans were instead redirected to counter new threats. Time, Germany's most valuable resource during the winter offensive, was slipping away. For the trapped troops, survival continued to depend on endurance and discipline. Supplies from the drop were rationed carefully. Defensive positions were maintained. Casualties still occurred, but surrender was no longer inevitable. When contact with advancing Allied units was finally re-established days later, the men who emerged were exhausted, wounded and frozen, but alive. The pilots who flew the mission returned quietly to their units. There were no headlines, no official commendations. In some cases, the incident was barely mentioned in unit histories. Mission reports were filed with neutral language. The lack of formal orders was omitted. What mattered to higher command was that the situation had stabilized. Only decades later, through cross-referenced mission logs, maintenance records, and pilot statements, did the full picture begin to emerge. These flights were not routine. They were not authorized. They were acts of individual judgment made in defiance of protocol. Guided by a simple calculation, grounded aircraft saved no one. Historians now recognize this episode as a powerful example of how war is shaped not only by strategy and command, but by decisions made in moments of uncertainty, by people willing to accept consequences in order to save lives. The mission did not alter the course of the entire war, but for the men on the ground, it altered everything. This was not a story of orders followed. It was a story of responsibility taken. And for years, it remained buried in the margins of reports, overshadowed by larger battles and louder victories. Yet without these flights, hundreds of soldiers might never have walked away from the forests where they were left behind. History often remembers generals and grand offensives, but sometimes it turns on a handful of pilots who chose to fly when they were told not to. If you want more World War II, stories revealed through real documents, mission logs, and first-hand accounts, told like breaking news, subscribe and stay with us. There are still many untold moments where courage outweighed command, and history is only now catching up.